far as understanding what we call strategy notation. This up here is a bunch of what we call strategy notation. Its purpose is so we have a common language that we can share. If Eric elicits, excuse me, if Eric elicits Valentin's strategy, I know what it is because I can read the notation. It's a common ground. Understand? So everybody's going to share the same understanding of what the notation is. We have some what we call major types of strategies that we use, and learning, memory, motivation, decision, and learning are the 5 major strategies that you use as you go through the world. Conceptually, strategies operate like this. You have all this information that comes through the world, right? All through your senses, all these pictures and sounds and noises and smells and tastes, and it's all buzzing around there. And some way your brain has to filter this information, doesn't it? Doesn't it? It's got to filter. It's all this stuff, right? So your brain filters it into major categories. We call those major categories metaprograms. Metaprograms are your beliefs, your values, your learnings. So all the information will go into you in relationship to what you believe, what you value, and what you've learned. Okay. That information then forms strategies. How you decide, how you learn, how you motivate, how you create. And those strategies then go into behaviors. So information, metaprograms, strategies, and behaviors. So your behavior is the last piece in the sequence. Now we're going to chunk one level up and understand what are the strategies that lead to the behaviors. Simply, a strategy is a sequence of sensory representations. That's your external and internal. What you hear is the outside, here is the inside. A sequence of sensory representations that goes through a step-by-step process that leads to a result. Now, a motivation strategy, for example, would go something like this. You look out the window and you see a dirty footpath, okay, rubbish on it. Okay. And then you say to yourself, you see that, and that may get a feeling. If it doesn't feel right. You then say to yourself, I need to clean up that footpath. Okay. And then you do it. Okay. When the strategy is executed, it's ended. The motivation strategy is just the thing that gets there. As soon as you start to do something, that's called execution. Most people who say they can't make up their mind about things usually have already made up their mind. You know, the woman who goes through, who's in an abusive relationship, has probably made up her mind a long time ago to leave her husband. However, she hasn't executed that decision, has she? A lot of people make up your minds to do that. You've made up your mind, you're going to do it, it's just you don't do it. So it's not a question of I can't decide, it's a question of I can't execute my decision. And that's a different step altogether. So there is deciding if you want to go buy a car. You go out, have a look at some cars, talk to someone, get a feel for it, and go for a drive, and then you buy it. As soon as you put that money out there, the strategy is finished. Okay, and you're driving away in your new car. Okay, so the strategy is the process that leads to the behavior. Creativity is the process that leads to a finished product. So we're going to go through each one of the major strategies. We're going to start with what's called a decision strategy. A few of these strategies have some general trends to them. Others, like for example, a learning strategy, has what we call well-formed conditions, but the strategy will be different depending on what you're learning. Whereas a creativity strategy, there's a certain structure for all creativity strategies. So some of these are going to have common trends, others will depend on what you're going to be doing with them, and that will dictate the sequence of information. Generally, all strategies need to be what we call well-formed. They need to have certain criteria to be successful. One of those is that your strategy should have all major representational systems. It should have sounds, feelings, and pictures. If it only has two of those, then we would say your strategy is not well-formed. It just means it doesn't have everything that it could have to be the best it can. And I'll cover probably, I don't know, maybe later today or tomorrow morning, what we call the conditions for a well-formed strategy. There's a lot in strategies, but not an insurmountable much of information. When you think about it, you got your A, you got your K, and you got your V, and you have the combinations of those. So there's a finite number of sequences that you can go through in your brain. We're going to understand and learn common trends. Visual people, feeling people, and auditory people would have each of them would have a common sort of strategy depending on their major representational system. And I'll talk to you about them. Okay, now up here is all this stuff is what we call strategy notation. And this is what I call a content discussion with you. I will review all this information. I don't expect you to learn it right now. It's a familiarization process that we're going through here. So when you elicit your strategies, at least you'll be familiar with what these things are supposed to mean and how they are represented or will be represented in a strategy that you elicit. Okay? All right. So your notation, these A stands for, okay, K stands for, that stands for, olfactory, and V stands for a picture, right? Okay, now this indication AID, which stands for, yeah, that's correct. When someone says, I looked at that and thought about it, the thought about it would be, that's what this would be, the AID. Okay, now your I would represent an internal image, picture, or sound as opposed to E, an external. The C, for example, VC would indicate a constructed image or imagined image as opposed to a remembered image. The same in the auditory or kinesthetic system. You can have constructed feelings, made up feelings. You can have constructed sounds, music, poetry, creative writing, your thinking of new ideas, new words, new word sequences, new ways to describe experiences. That would be the auditory construct. This is what with a two symbols, two representational system symbols with a line separating it, indicates a comparison. I'm going shopping. I want to find a shirt to wear. Okay. I have recalled a shirt that Eric had on the other day. I want to buy one of these. So I go on into the shops and I look at the clothes on the rack, okay, and I compare what I remembered I wanted, okay, with what I see. Okay, so that's where that comparison is. You can have a comparison in any representational system. You can have a comparison between representational systems. You can compare a sound with a feeling, a picture with a sound, a feeling with a picture. Technically, you can have any combination. However, generally people compare in the same representational systems. If you're playing music, you will compare what you hear outside with what you recall is the sound is supposed to be. When people play music, they have stored references for how music is supposed to sound, or the particular pitch of the instrument. When they make a noise, they're comparing the reference sound with the external sound, okay, to get it to match. Just like we did when we did the exercise, the pacing exercise. Remember we paced the tone, tempo, and volume? I said, listen to the person, imagine yourself, okay, using the same sound, compare your voice against what you hear out there. It's the same thing. It's like this. You were going, well, this is comparing how you sound with how the person sounds, comparing two external sounds. You can compare an internal sound. Generally, it's not as good. You heard of people who sing this out in the shower? They sing in the shower! They think they have this great, this really fantastic voice, and you say, please don't give up your day job. What happens there? They're singing, however, they're hearing an internal voice of what they think they would like to sound like. They don't really hear themselves. It's the same thing when somebody has these earphones on, and they're really loud, and they're singing, and their voice is horrible. But they just hear, da 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 da, right? Like that. So, not good. Okay, so you can get a comparison in any representational system. This here with an arrow through it, this is called a synesthesia. Synesthesias are really interesting. If someone says, wow, that's a real cool sound. Cool sound. That's a synesthesia. Woo, that is a hot color. That's a synesthesia. It's when two representations happen at the same time. How are you such a good dancer? I just feel the music. They get an instantaneous response. It's almost like two things happening at the same time. However, in reality, they don't happen at the same time. To get a cool sound, the person first needs to hear it, don't they? However, their interpretation is that that's really cool, or a hot picture. Get the idea? Okay, now, in synesthesias, if someone says, that's a hot picture, or that's a hot color, the sequence in language is what? A hot color. What? Hot color. What representational systems are those?
KV.
KV, right. Yeah, hot color. Hot color. Okay, you got to remember this because this is on your written evaluation. You're going to need to understand the sequences. Okay, now, hot color. However, in order to experience that heat, I first have to see it, don't I? If I say that's a cool sound, I can't say that unless I've heard the sound first, could I? No. Okay. So when you write a synesthesia down, you write it as it is experienced, not how it's expressed. So if I say that's a cool sound, I write it down, I write it like this. Okay? A, K. Okay? Because that's how I experienced, even though that I say it in reverse. You can pick up synesthesias in two ways. One is through language, like I said, cool sound. The other one is, I could have been somebody. You see two accessing cues at the same time. This is a VK synesthesia when you hear it, when you have two accessing cues that happen at the same time. Okay. It looks really good to me. Okay, there's a auditory and a visual predicate. So there's a synesthesia there. So synesthesias can happen either experientially, which means you can see them in the representational systems, or you can hear them in language. Synesthesias are probably the hardest of the cues to pick up because sometimes they're out of consciousness. Some person would say, well, it just doesn't feel good. There's a synesthesia going on, however, you just hear the feel because it may be out of consciousness for the person. So you have to be sharp. Okay? Now, everything you've learned, you have all the tools you need right now to be effective in eliciting strategies. We're not going to learn anything else. I'm going to teach you how to write them down. But how to elicit them, you've already learned what you need. You know what this means. You know what that means, right? So you know what all the accessing cues are, and you just need to put them together now and to elicit a sequence of events that lead to a result, and that's going to be called the strategy. So now we're going to be practicing recognizing the accessing cues in different sequences and combinations. And that's where the skill is recognizing the sequences and combination, because you're going to find that if you ask somebody how they learned that and they go like that, it's done. They've gone through the strategy. So you have to begin to learn a way to pick up information very fast. Okay? And one of those is to understand about strategies, because some information can be presupposed. Another thing is that you just have to be there. You have to be aware. It can happen at a blink of an eye, or it can happen really slowly. But you gotta be there. So where are we? Okay, so we've done that, right? This represents a repeated step. If I want to buy a house, I'll go look at a house, I'll talk to someone about it, and I'll get a feel for it. Okay, go on to the next one. I'll go look at a house, I'll talk to someone, and I'll get a feel for it. So I've actually repeated the steps in the strategy, haven't I? I've looked at a house, I've said something, I got a feel. Now, you can represent it like this. I looked at a house, I talked to someone, I got a feel for it. I looked at a house, I talked to someone, I got a feel for it, right? Or you can say, I looked at a house, I talked to someone, I got a feel for it, loop. I looked at another house, I talked to someone, and I got a feel for it. The idea, so looping just means a repeated step. If you don't understand, if I give you information and you don't understand it, you ask me a question. You will now, in your mind, loop back to the beginning of your learning strategy and go through it again. So when you learn things, when you create things, you did, it's not quite right, we'll go back, make an adjustment. Oh, it's not quite right, go back and make an adjustment. So you'll tend to go through these processes, and you can do them as many times as you need, as long as there's somewhere in the line there's a change of information. If I go, I really like that jumper, okay? I really like that jumper. I look at it, I feel it, and I go, well, I really don't know, you know? Okay, I'll look at it and I feel it, and I really don't know, okay? I look at it and I feel it. And see, I'm getting the idea. I'm going over and over the same stuff, but I can't exit from the strategy. But if I go, I really like that jumper, I look at it, I feel it, and I don't know. What's the price? Oh, you get 2 for 1 today. Oh, I'll take it. Okay, I've added information now, which allowed me to exit from the strategy. You can go around as many times as you need to, as long as something changes, which eventually will lead to exiting. Okay? So loops are okay. Now, a few more things. MPs and arrows. That there's 3 things that happen between representational systems. One is that there can be a congruent response. If I say, I want everybody to stand up. Okay, all right, stand up. Okay, I've given an instruction. Okay, good. So, thank goodness. I said something, and you acted on it, right? You can sit down. That's represented by an arrow. Okay, that's called a congruent response. If I said, okay, I want everybody to stand up, and what some of you have done already, you probably said to yourself, why does he want us to do that? What is this all about? Okay, so instead of acting on the instruction, you've talked about it to yourself. And that's representative of an arrow with an M on top. It's called a meta response. You don't do anything. You're commenting on the information. Another thing that you can do, I said I would like you all to stand up, and you immediately glue yourself to the chair. Okay? In other words, you do an opposite response than I'd like you to do. And that's called a polarity response. Okay, that's a P. That's an arrow with the P. You can have a congruent response, a meta response, or a polarity response. Those are the three options that you have between strategies. You're going to learn when we talk a little bit about strategy design, that talking about information and polarity responses tend to make your strategies longer and more complicated than they need to. The world is a lot easier if you just do what you're told. Like I said, you want to learn NLP? Just do what you're told. It's easy. If you sit around and talk about it, you're going to get things get complicated. You start to get confused. What I love is I talked to Eric and Julia and Valentine, and okay, you got it. Now I want you to go elicit the strategies. And so they get in, and then Valentine starts to elicit the strategy. And then Julia goes, oh, wait a minute. I'm kind of confused about that. What about this? And then Eric says, all right, I thought I understand it, but now that you've asked this question, I don't know what to do either. And then Valentine goes, well, you know, I'm really confused now. Then pretty soon nobody knows what to do. So it happens. It's better just, you know, here's the instruction and go do it and find out what you learn. Okay, where are we here? So that's your meta, polarity, congruent, and that's about it really. They got a little, this here, plus minus just means either you have it or not. Strategies generally, for the most part, you're going to do something, it'll feel right, and you'll execute. Okay? Now this isn't 100% of the time. Sometimes you'll end on a voice that says, okay, you can do it, something like that. But generally it ends on, well, either, okay, you got it, or, I don't know about this. That at the end of the strategy, it's either going to be fine, or it's not quite right, and you need to go back and get additional information. The plus minus just represents that you go through kinesthetic, what we call it, plus, minus, exit. If it's minus, you go back. If it's plus, you're off and going. Okay? Now, wasn't that easy?